They mocked him for being just a mechanic. 10 minutes later, he did what their $200 million team couldn't. Glass walls stretched from floor to ceiling, revealing Dallas in all its restless sprawl, a city humming beneath the late afternoon sun. The boardroom was meant to impress. Polished mahogany table, chairs that cost more than most people's rent, and the faint antiseptic tang of a space that rarely saw dirt. But today, it reeked of ozone, burned insulation, and quiet humiliation. At the center of it all sat the prototype, a power unit stripped raw, panels off, cables hanging like nerves cut loose. It should have been Helix Dynamics' crown jewel, the engine that rewrote history. Instead, it was an open wound. Vera Calder leaned back in her leather chair at the head of the table, one hand poised on a sleek silver pen, the other resting on the armrest like a queen on her throne. At 42, she wore her authority like armor, sharp suit, sharper eyes, movements precise and unhurried. Every tilt of her head, every breath seemed to judge. She was the storm people tried to impress, but usually failed. Around her, the engineers, men and women in crisp shirts, perfect collars, eyes sunken from weeks without progress, sat silent, their notes filled with numbers that led nowhere. Across from them, Deshaun Miles looked like he'd walked into the wrong building. His boots were scuffed, laces frayed. His gray shirt bore the creases of a man who didn't waste time with ironing. Grease stained his knuckles, scars thin and white along his fingers, each mark a story from years of machines. That bit back. At his feet sat a toolbox, dented and worn, the handle wrapped in tape. He didn't look out of place because he was nervous. He looked out of place because the room was built to remind people like him that they didn't belong. Vera's smile was the kind that cut deeper than an insult. "We've burned 4 weeks, and a fortune," she said, her voice smooth, almost bored. "And you? You're from a corner shop in Missouri. Dazzle us." The air in the room shifted. Some of the engineers tried to hide their smirks behind their hands. Others didn't bother. A senior engineer, tall, thin, with wire-rimmed glasses, polished them with slow, deliberate care, like a judge preparing to deliver a final ruling. Laughter didn't need to be loud to sting. It just needed to exist. Deshaun didn't look at them. He looked at the machine. His voice was steady, the kind that came from someone used to being ignored but never silenced. "I didn't drive all. Night for applause," he said. "You said the machine won't stay alive. I'll listen till it does. No bravado, no performance. Just a man stating what he came to do." He crouched by the prototype, pulling the flashlight from his bag, moving with the same patience he'd used in the shop back home. Vera's eyes glittered. "Tell you what," she said, leaning forward just enough to make the whole room bend toward her. "Make it sing right here, and I'll make a commitment you'll never forget." A ripple of gasps and half-laughs rolled across the table. A couple of engineers glanced at each other with smug certainty, waiting for the stranger to collapse under the weight of his own arrogance. Deshaun turned his light toward the wiring, his face illuminated in pale white. "Metal doesn't read diplomas," he said softly. "It tells the truth if you let it." The room fell still. The hum of the air conditioner sounded louder than it should. Outside, cars moved like silent, toys across the city grid. Inside, no one dared breathe too loudly. The only sound that mattered now was the faint click of Vera's pen against the table, sharp, impatient, a warning that time was running thin. And then Deshaun leaned closer, flashlight beam tracing across steel and wires, as if listening for a heartbeat no one else had heard. The engineers watched with folded arms and narrowed eyes. Vera studied him the way a predator studies prey, her smirk unchanged, her certainty unshaken. But for the first time, just for a second, the silence felt different. Not the silence of dismissal, but of anticipation. The moment stretched. The city loomed beyond the glass. And Deshaun, with grease-stained hands and steady breath, began to search for a truth everyone else had missed. Vera Mesa, Arizona. Hand-me-down calculators. I learned early. If you don't outwork rooms like this, they swallow you. The image of Vera as a girl flickers into being. Bare dorm walls, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, a desk piled with second-hand textbooks, coffee rings staining the wood. She scribbles formulas into a spiral notebook until her wrist cramps, then shakes her hand and keeps going. Outside, dawn burns the sky, but she doesn't notice. Her world is the numbers, the grind, the quiet conviction that she will never be poor again, never be underestimated, never be small enough to vanish in a room. Now, in the boardroom, her thumb taps against the gleaming silver pen, a steady rhythm like a gavel in the hands of a judge. The tool is more than an accessory. It's her anchor. Every decision, every dismissal, every sharp word she's delivered has been punctuated with that subtle click. It's the sound of someone who has clawed their way to the top and refuses to loosen their grip. Deshawn, Prospect Avenue. We fixed what people couldn't afford to replace. I learned this. Don't guess. Watch, touch, wait. The memory drags him back to the cracked asphalt of his childhood street. A shop sign hangs crooked, the paint faded from years of sun. Inside, the air smells of oil, sweat, and coffee that sat too long on the burner. His grandfather's voice is gravel, his hands calloused, his patience endless. The old man guides Deshawn's small fingers over the teeth of a busted gear, showing him how to feel the wear, how to listen for the story metal tells if you care enough to hear it. Cut to a teenage Deshawn kneeling beside a rusted lawnmower. A neighbor hovers anxiously, explaining how they need it working by morning to make a shift. Deshawn's hair is matted, his hands black with grease, but his expression is calm, deliberate. He cleans the carburetor, adjusts the belt, and with one tug of the cord, the engine rattles alive. The neighbor's shoulders sag with relief. Deshawn doesn't celebrate. He just nods, wipes his hands on a rag, and moves to the next job. Back. In the boardroom, his face is unreadable, his flashlight beam cutting across the tangle of wires like a scalpel. Where Vera's eyes are blades meant to cut down resistance, Deshawn's are instruments meant to detect what others missed. The contrast is stark. She wields power like a weapon. He wields attention like a stethoscope pressed to a failing heart. Engineer 1. He doesn't even have the schematics. The whisper is sharp, condescending, designed to wound. But Deshawn doesn't flinch, doesn't look up, doesn't waste energy on men who measure themselves with credentials and overlook the obvious. His thumb traces the chewed wire tie, feeling the story it tells, the careless hands that installed it, the stress it carried until it bent under strain. Deshawn. You drew a symphony. Someone handed the orchestra the wrong sheet. His words hang in the air, strange poetry in a sterile boardroom. Some scoff under their breath. Others shift uncomfortably, as if the truth might be heavier than their pride can bear. Deshawn's jaw tightens as his fingers trace the harness path, moving slow, deliberate, like a surgeon following a vein. He isn't guessing. He isn't rushing. He's listening, because machines speak to those who wait long enough to hear. Deshawn's hands move with deliberate patience as he grips the clamp, its edges marred and bent from too many careless adjustments. The metal resists him, squealing as if it has grown comfortable in its cruel position, biting down on the bundle. Of wires it has held hostage for too long. His knuckles whiten, veins straining under his skin. But his eyes remain calm, focused not on the struggle, but on the inevitable release. With a final twist, the clamp relents, snapping open with a sharp metallic click that echoes louder than it should in the tense silence of the boardroom. The wire bundle instantly recoils, springing outward with a faint shiver, like a body finally, drawing breath after being suffocated. The movement is so slight, so unremarkable to the untrained, but to Deshawn, it is everything. He watches it flex back into its natural line, freed of the brutal pinch that had been strangling its function. He exhales softly, not with relief, but with confirmation. The diagnosis is unfolding exactly as he suspected. Deshawn, to the machine, under his breath. You've been choking. The words are not for the boardroom, not even for Vera. They are an intimate acknowledgement. A mechanic's bedside whisper to a patient that has been in pain for too long. Machines cannot speak in words, but they complain in tremors, in irregularities, in small betrayals of sound and motion. Deshawn hears them the way others hear music. His flashlight cuts across the inner frame as his free hand wraps his knuckles. against the nearby housing. The sound that returns is dull, lifeless, the tone of something that should resonate but doesn't. His head tilts slightly, eyes narrowing. It is confirmation, another breadcrumb in the trail the machine is laying out for him. He draws out a screwdriver, the handle worn smooth from years of use, and sets to work on the panel. The screws clatter onto the boardroom table one by one, tiny metallic notes punctuating the thick silence. The panel comes free, sliding away to reveal the hidden flaw. Beneath, a hairline fissure runs along the intake, so thin it seems to vanish, if one looks directly at it. But Deschamps' hand knows what his eyes already see. He runs his thumb across it, feeling the minute disruption in the otherwise smooth surface. He doesn't need magnification or sensors. He needs only touch, the language his hands have been fluent in since childhood. Deschamps, quiet to the room. Leak here. Starves the cycle before it steadies. His voice is calm, matter of fact, not triumphant. He shifts, following the harness with his fingers tracing the lines as though reading Braille. Each path tells a story of design and error, intention and oversight. When he reaches a junction, he pauses, the wires bent awkwardly, the sensor feeding from the wrong alignment. He shakes his head slowly. Deschamps. And this routing? The sensor hears ghosts. A murmur ripples through the engineers. One of the younger ones, barely past his training years, pushes his chair back and steps forward before realizing he's moved. His notebook tumbles from his grip, pages splaying across the polished floor. His eyes dart between Deschamps' steady hands and the flaw that seems so obvious now that it has been revealed. Young engineer, how did we miss that? There is no malice in his tone. It is disbelief tinged with shame. The question of someone realizing the hours he poured into models and equations had been undone by something smaller than a fingernail crack. Deschamps, you hunted dragons. It was a splinter. The words are plain, but they land with weight. He doesn't say them cruelly. He says them with the tired certainty of someone who has watched others overcomplicate problems while the simple truth rusted beneath their noses. Several of the older engineers exchange uneasy glances, arms crossing tighter across their chests, pride stiffening against the intrusion of clarity. Deschamps doesn't linger on their discomfort. He reaches into the shallow tray of spare parts, left behind during failed attempts. His fingers sift through them with the practiced grace of a man who doesn't need to look, just feel. He finds a piece, a fitting still intact, still useful though dismissed as insignificant, and lifts it free. In seconds, he replaces the cracked intake, securing it with quiet efficiency. His movements are steady, confident, without hesitation. Or theatrics. The harness is next, unraveled and straightened, rerouted along a cleaner path. His fingers work like they're braiding strands of meaning back into sense, aligning each wire so it lies in harmony rather than tension. He resets the clamp, but this time adjusts its angle, ensuring it grips firm without strangling. It is the kind of correction that speaks not of brute force, but of respect for the machine's design. Vera watches, her smirk a mask slipping at the edges. For the first time, doubt flickers across her expression, though she buries it quickly beneath the steel of her pride. She straightens, her pen pausing mid-click, as if the rhythm has faltered. Her lips curve again, but there's strain behind it now. Vera, even if you're right, our software kept killing the start sequence. Her voice cuts sharp, the weapon of someone unwilling to yield. It is not just skepticism, it is defense. The last bastion of a commander watching her authority chipped away by an outsider. Deschamps rises slowly, wiping his hands on the rag tucked into his belt. He looks at the machine first, not Vera, as though confirming its readiness, acknowledging its silence. Only then does he turn his gaze to the console. His expression remains calm, unshaken, as he delivers the answer with the blunt simplicity of truth. Deschamps. Because your code trusted a bad whisper. Fix the whisper, the code stops panicking. The sentence falls heavy in the air, undeniable in its logic. No theory, no guesswork, just fact, stripped bare. He folds the rag and sets it aside, nodding toward the control station. Deschamps. Bring it up. The senior engineer, tall and gaunt, lets out a short scoff meant to disguise his own unease. The sound rings hollow, his lips tighten, but his body betrays him. His hand, despite his posture of disdain, already hovers near the pad. Fingers twitch, compelled by the possibility that this stranger has solved what he and his team could not. Around him, the others shift, waiting for Vera's signal, for permission to act. The hum of the room deepens, filled with anticipation and the electric tension of pride against truth. The senior engineer hesitates, fingers suspended above the pad, the weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders. In a single press lies humiliation or revelation, ruin or redemption. The silence stretches, and all eyes are fixed on him. A couple of quiet laughs bloom, the kind that burst out of throats too eager for failure, too ready to claim victory over the stranger before the test has even run its course. The chuckles are sharp and dismissive, like knives tapped against crystal, a chorus of skeptics rehearsing their triumph. For them, the sputter of the machine at ignition is proof enough, the stammer of gears their vindication. They lean back, some crossing arms, some exchanging glances, smug smiles tugging at their lips. To them, it is over. The outsider has reached the same dead end they had. The machine will stall, the CEO will smirk, and the story will end the way they had all quietly prayed it would. But then, a shift. Subtle at first, like a breath taken after holding it too long. The RPMs that had lurched unevenly begin to smooth, the ragged stammer easing into rhythm. The monitors flicker with numbers that once darted erratically, now settling, lining themselves into clean rows, as though finally convinced to behave. The low, confident thrum grows, spreading into the glass, box with the undeniable presence of something alive. It is not just mechanical. It is a heartbeat found steady and strong, pulsing against the walls, reverberating into the bones of everyone present. The laughter dies mid-note. The smug smiles flatten, replaced by stillness. Every face turns toward the machine, eyes wide, breath caught. They watch the monitors with disbelief, the figures no longer chaos but harmony, numbers locking into ranges they had never once achieved despite all their calculations, their late nights, their collective genius. Young engineer whispering, stable. It's stable. The words are barely audible, yet they carry more weight than a shout. They ripple across the room, undeniable truth wrapped in awe. The young engineer's eyes shine, his earlier shame dissolved into wonder. The senior engineer stiffens, his authority unraveling inch by inch. His shoulders, once squared with superiority, now sag, losing their rigid height. Pride drains from him like air from a punctured tire. He doesn't speak, because there is nothing to defend against what is in front of him. Deshan doesn't crow, doesn't smirk, doesn't demand recognition. He stands quiet, hands loose at his sides, gaze fixed not on the people but on the graphs, watching the curves settle like a parent counting the breaths of a child in recovery. His calm presence, his lack of gloating, only magnifies the contrast between him and the room that had mocked him. Deshan. You were arguing with it. You forgot to listen. The sentence drifts through the space, soft but cutting, like a scalpel laid against pride. It isn't cruel. It's instructive. A reminder, not a rebuke. The truth in it leaves no room for defense. Vera's pen, that constant click and tap that had been the metronome of her authority, stops. Her fingers still, her body frozen. Without her permission, her mind betrays her, unspooling a memory she has long kept buried. A hood propped open in the driveway of her childhood home. The Arizona sun beating down. Her father bent over an engine, grease smeared across his cheek like war paint, his voice warm as he explained compression, not as a lecture, but as a secret meant only for her. His eyes gleamed with pride as he showed her how pressure and release created motion, how everything in a machine mirrored the rhythm of life itself. She remembers the smell of oil, the heat of the day, the feeling that what he gave her in that moment was magic. Knowledge meant to empower, not diminish. Her breath hitches. She blinks, forcing the memory away, dragging herself back into the present. But the damage is done. The fortress she built from steel and pride has a crack running through it now, and she knows it. The engineers who once orbited Vera now find themselves drifting toward Deschamps. Their questions tumble out, tentative at first, then insistent. Engineer 2. Would you consult for us? The plea is genuine, almost desperate. They no longer care about titles, no longer care about appearances. They care only that the machine lives, and that Deschamps is the one who gave it life. Deschamps. I'll help if the work respects the work. Pride can wait outside. His voice is steady, not bargaining but setting terms. He doesn't need them. He doesn't crave their validation. He simply draws the line. Respect the craft, or he will not stay. The machine hums on, a steady metronome, its rhythm measuring not just stability, but a new order being written in that glass room. The sound is both judgment and promise. Vera rises from her seat. The room stills, waiting for her to strike, to reclaim her authority with one cutting remark. But no quip arrives. Her lips part, close, then part again. For once, she does not reach for armor. She chooses accuracy instead, the admission tasting strange but necessary. Vera, I misjudged you. The words hang, heavy and true. They are not apology, not surrender, but recognition. Deschamps smiles, small. Happens when the hands don't look like the hands you expect. His smile is not smug. It is quiet, almost weary. A truth spoken by someone who has lived his whole life being measured against the wrong scale. The crowd thins, engineers trailing out of the glass room in small knots of murmured conversation, their voices hushed as if afraid to disrupt the steady rhythm behind them. The machine still purrs, a steady animal at rest, the sound low and, sure, alive in a way it had never been before. It's not just a motor anymore. It's proof, it's rebuke, it's possibility. Each footstep out of the room is reluctant, as though leaving might break the spell, but eventually the semicircle of judgment dissolves into silence. What remains is only two figures and the hum. Vera sits alone at the head of the table. Same chair, same polished wood, but the atmosphere around her has shifted. Where once her presence dominated the room, filling it with the weight of command, now the silence feels heavier than her authority. She doesn't tap her pen. She doesn't arrange her posture. She simply sits, a woman measuring the cost of a culture she thought was strength. Her reflection in the glass wall blends with the skyline beyond, and for the first time in years, she looks less like a verdict and more like someone caught between pride and recognition. Across the room, Deschamps works with the quiet ritual of a man who knows the value of his tools. Each screwdriver, each light, each spare is placed deliberately back into his kit, cleaned with a rag pulled from the pocket of his worn jeans. His hands move with respect, not haste. Tools aren't possessions to him. They're companions, as much part of his craft as his instincts. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. The sound of the engine fills the silence, both of them listening to it breathe. Vera, plain, almost to herself. I built a culture that equates volume with value. That's on me. Her voice cracks slightly at the edges, softer than she intends. It's not a confession to him, not really. It's an admission to the walls, to the city beyond, to herself. Deschamps pauses mid-motion, the rag still in his hand. He considers her words without turning, then slowly reaches into his kit. He sets something down on the table between them. A small, cheap clamp. Its teeth are bent, too aggressive, the kind of part that looks sturdy at first glance, but betrays its purpose once put to use. Deschamps. This is what strangled your miracle. Good people installed it anyway because it looked secure. His voice is even, not accusing. He taps the clamp once with a finger, then gestures toward the engine that hums behind them, steady as a clock. Deschamps' security isn't force. It's fit. Beat of silence stretches between them. Vera's eyes lock on the clamp, then flick back to the machine, then to him. The words sink deeper than any critique she has ever received from her board. Finally, she nods. Not quick, not dismissive, but like someone who has finally heard a note that was always there, playing beneath the noise, waiting to be recognized. Hey, Next day, the board gathers in the same gleaming room. Polished shoes, pressed suits, gleaming tablets. The agenda waits in neat stacks, forecasts highlighted, profit margins prepared like ammunition. But Vera doesn't open with the usual projections. She doesn't stride in with charts and numbers. Instead, she stands at the head of the table, her pen resting silent in her hand. The hum of the machine still echoes in her bones. Vera. We're adding a rule. Listen before you lead. Credentials open doors. Humility keeps them from slamming. Thuan. Sentence lands with a force that numbers never could. For a moment, no one speaks. The board members glance at one another, their carefully constructed expressions faltering. Some look rattled. This isn't the Vera they've followed for years. Others look relieved, as though something unspoken has finally been allowed air. Engineers at the back of the room exchange glances that carry a spark of hope, the kind that suggests the tide might be turning in their favor. The silence stretches. Then someone clears their throat, nods once. Another jots something in their notebook, not as a defense, but as if committing it to memory. Slowly the rule begins to take root, its presence undeniable. On the street level, the world moves with its usual indifference. Horns blare, pedestrians weave, taxis surge past in waves of yellow. Deshawn pushes through the building's glass doors into daylight. No one stops him. No one claps. Engines rarely get applause, and he has never expected any. His boots scuff against the pavement, each step grounded in the kind of quiet certainty that doesn't need witness. He carries his toolkit in one hand, the weight familiar, grounding. It isn't just a box of tools. It's a history, a legacy, a set of truths he's collected over years of listening where others argued. He walks to his truck, paint faded, edges worn, but steady, reliable. He lifts the kit into the passenger seat like a trusted partner, then closes the door with a solid thud. For a moment, he just stands there, breathing in the city air, tasting the mix of exhaust and concrete, feeling the hum of the world around him. He doesn't need the skyline's approval. He doesn't need headlines or recognition. The engine upstairs is still running, and that's enough. He slides behind the wheel, grips it with hands that know the weight of labor, and exhales. Once. No victory dance, no speech, just a breath, full and even. Then he turns the ignition, and with the same calm certainty that carried him into the room, Deshawn drives away. If this hits something true, share it with the loudest room you know. Comment, listen before you lead. Tag someone who needs the reminder that metal doesn't read diplomas.